This project is made possible by support from the National Endowment for the Arts, the Missouri Arts Council, and the Kansas City Art Institute. Welcome to the Mother Ann podcast, where women who are both artists and mothers discuss their diverse experiences as creators and caregivers. I'm Eleanor Lynn Midyett, project manager and co-curator of the Mother Ann Project and assistant professor of liberal arts at the Kansas City Art Institute. I'm also the mother of 4 sons. Each episode features discussions with artists and other individuals involved in the Mother Ann exhibition, which runs from September 5th to November 21st, 2025 at the Leedy-Voulkos Art Center in Kansas City, Missouri. The exhibit and the podcast disrupt preconceived notions that parenthood diminishes one's artistic practice and celebrate motherhood as a source of expansive creative potential.
For me, like anything, the artistic practice, the mothering practice, everything involves touch. Like touch is such a cornerstone to both of those things. And I really wanted to be able to feel it, to be able to write mother and to be able to feel that underneath my fingertips.
In this episode, I speak with artist mother Priya Suresh Kambli.
My name is Priya Suresh Kambli. I'm a professor of art at Truman State University. I've been at Truman for 25 years, so my academic sort of career and understanding of what it means is kind of based on a public liberal arts education in a rural Midwest, and kind of my identity as an artist and as an educator comes from this institution just because of the longevity of teaching here and sort of its mission. So my artistic practice has always kind of looked and thought about sort of my migrant narrative. And the reason for that is it's sort of pretty early on, it is a big sort of event in life that sort of it dictates so many things that have sort of since then happened, which is at 15, losing my parents at a really young age, at 18, being sponsored by my aunt, my mother's sister, to come here to the United States to study, choosing art as a subject, which I didn't have access to. I wouldn't have never been an artist if I wouldn't have come here. And then packing up my life in India and then coming here with that sort of fragments of that distilled life here and learning about art and eventually sort of re-looking at the suitcase that I had packed and unpacking it again in my artistic practice in my studio and looking at these objects and working with these objects in my art. So in that sense, there's a linear narrative that's very sort of present in my work. And the conversation always kind of comes down to sort of family, thinking about the sense of belonging, how identity is sort of constructed because of these multiple things that happen in life, and sort of using my photographic language to sort of address that. And at some point, understanding even the photographic language has certain boundaries and sort of wanting to expand those boundaries to kind of making sure that the content or the idea that I want to approach and think about is given its due diligence.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that really moving personal narrative that, so many components to moving to the United States and then also becoming an artist. So you're also a mother. Can you talk about what stage of parenting you're in?
Yeah, I'm in an odd state of parenting. I have one child, 19 years old, who just moved out this summer. And so an empty nester in that way, but I also have a 14-year-old who just went to band practice and we had to drop her off, so I'm still like, I still have like 4 more years of getting up early in the morning and making, a lunch for somebody, packing a lunch for somebody, Actually, my husband does that part, but, like waking up for that and doing all those things with that. So I had the kids have 5.5 years difference in age. So it's been really interesting to kind of think about parenting, but in like, I've always worked in different spheres because they're different genders, they're very different personalities, and they're 5.5 years apart. So I've always thought about parenting as like multitasking because their requirements have been so different and challenging. But now it really kind of gets echoed differently because one of them is missing in the household, but I'm constantly calling to check on him and see how he's doing. And he's just starting to navigate in life as an adult, So what that role is new to me. What that means to be now sort of looking at him from a point of view of somebody who's completely independent yet so dependent, is really intriguing and interesting. And also I teach 18 to 22 years old. So this is sort of, I feel, my wheelhouse, but it's different when I'm teaching them versus when I'm parenting them. But yeah, so odd stage, one child at home, one child away.
Yeah, you raise a really good point about how the role of mother is very dynamic and it's always changing. And I guess the question of saying what stage of parenting suggests, the implication is that you're only in one stage of parenting, but the truth is that you can be in multiple stages at once. Do you see a common thread between your parenting and your studio practice? We've kind of been talking about it as, or I've been labeling it as ethics of mothering, but just sort of this relationship between your parenting, your approach to the world, and maybe also how that informs your studio practice.
Yeah, both parenting and artistic practice have been a tough navigation, in terms of like, I don't think I came out as a good parent, or even, I don't even know what a good parent is, but mothering wasn't necessarily as, I wasn't in tune to it. I didn't know exactly how to perform and function. And art making kind of similarly had its own sort of conundrums. I came to an artistic practice not from artistic background. I came to artistic practice to a practice that was a very Western practice and came from the East. So I was looking at work made by Western artists because that's what we were seeing in the classroom, and sort of not being able to identify with the work I was seeing or being able to identify with myself in that space, So I felt like an outsider. It took me a long time. And I think it was after grad school I kind of understood what art making was for me, right? And what it entailed. And it kind of came about by seeing an exhibition up in New York called the Alkazi. And the exhibition was hand painted portraits that were made in Indian studio. And for the first time, I was in presence of something that I didn't need access to understand. I didn't need resources to understand. I understood the work implicitly. And the reason was because I had similar images like the ones in this white, pristine gallery in the suitcase that I had brought with me, and they belonged to my family. They were very vernacular, and they felt everyday, and they felt very approachable. So I think, this is, of course, pre-Instagram, pre-anything era. So trying to find work that kind of spoke to you meant that you were either introduced that in the classroom or you had to go find it on yourself. And I think that finding journey took me a little bit longer. And I think the parenting journey is the same way. Like, to figure out what kind of parent I want to become is I've had to kind of navigate. Today I'm going to be this kind of parent. Does that work for me? Or like this year, did that work for me? No, or like, how do I approach it? If it didn't work, what do I do? And I think that's been sort of the part of, especially with my oldest, I talk about if I had my youngest one and the youngest one, I would think parenting was like the most easiest thing in the world, but my oldest has always humbled me to the role of a parent, And so I think as a parent also, I'm like evolving, like how do I actually become a parent? How do I actually become a parent that this child needs, and specifically this child needs, and not, and so I feel like that both those journeys have taken time, and they're still in evolution, they're still in play. And I think they run parallel, but they're informed by each other constantly, right? I think there's a risk taking that happens in art making that kind of you're always pushing things forward, you're trying to establish things, resolve things. And I think with parenting also, you're constantly trying to make sure that you have the best relationship with your child at whatever stage they are, so that communication or conversations are always in play. And I think that's with the work too. It's about conversations. It's about communicating thoughts, ideas. And so I think for me, I think I've learned more from art making how to become a parent than from parenting how to become an artist. I think having my first child sort of grounded me in a way that I needed grounding in life in general. But I think the art making has been my way of sort of solving things, not just my artistic practice, but in practice in life, and to kind of revert back to things, because in my own practice, I can make mistakes and I can correct them, but I'm in my own space. In life, when I'm parenting and making mistakes, they're seen by quite a few eyes and recorded by quite a few ears, So the coming back and undoing takes a little bit longer time period, I would say.
Yeah. First of all, I think it's refreshing that you're saying that, your path as an artist and also your path as a mother, that were not clearly laid out for you, and that it's something that you've had to figure out, and both are very dynamic, which I think is very real and very true. It's something that we can all relate to. I also like how you've sort of inverted the question, that motherhood is not necessarily informed your artistic practice, but your artistic practice has helped you in your life and in your role as a mother, I think, and just the, leaning into that dynamic aspect of figuring things out. Have your children served as creative inspiration?
Yeah, since my first child was born, everything he did, everything he said has been sort of part of my practice, part of my making. I remember I was looking at the New Yorker, and I don't remember this painter's name, but the paintings were just these beautiful blue squares or rectangles. And I was showing Covey, who was like, maybe my oldest was like 2 or 3 years old at that point. And I was like, isn't this a beautiful painting? And he looked at me and he said, that not painting, that paint only, And I thought that was so fascinating. So in that sense, like, I think art making has been a way of sharing, that's how conversations have happened, and way of kind of creating a language that's intimately ours, So I think inspiration in the sense that we have this bond that's made from art making. And my daughter, since she was young, has been like attached to my side. So she is sort of like a historian of my making. She can tell you all the things I've done, and she's participated in making with me. And once in a while, she's just kind of gone ahead and constructed a piece for me because I'm struggling with it. I was just at Headlands doing a residency, and Headlands is in Sausalito, San Francisco. And for 1 week, I had the family house. So both my kids could come to the space and be part of my studio. And that was really amazing, because Soha came in, my youngest came in and instantly was present in my studio. But Kavi, who has always been sort of aware of my making, but sort of aware in his own world, kind of walked in my studio and went, huh, this is very different from anything you've made before. And that was really interesting to hear because he had been tracking me, just the way I track them. I think the way they track me is through my art making. I'm tracking them through their different stages in life, and they're tracking me through the different stages of art making in my life. And so I think that was really fascinating. And I'd made a piece at Headlands that I was going to rip up because it was a test piece, and I was packing, and it seemed impossible to kind of bring that with me. And my oldest, Kavi, who's in Berkeley right now, instantly went, "Can I have that?" And I was like, "Yeah, you can have it. Do you want it?" And he was like, "Yeah, I want it." And so it was really fascinating to understand that my role as a parent is pretty apparent, but my role as an artist in their lives, my identity as an artist, is also very present, right? That I'm not just a parent to them. I have this other identity, and that they see it. And I think that for me is like the best validation I could ever have.
Yeah, I agree. I think so many times children only see their parents as their parents. So mother is just, the relationship is in the capacity as mother and as parent. So actually, I think it's quite an accomplishment that they register you as an artist and, a separate individual with your own pursuit. So I think that is quite an accomplishment. Are they artists also? Are they makers as well?
Yeah, they both have been makers since day one. And in fact, their fine motor skills are so amazing that like the Indian mother in me was like, my kids are going to be surgeons. And they were just like, no, we're not going to be surgeons. And I think my oldest is definitely an artist, but comes from a very sort of practical, sort of engineering sort of space. He's interested in the making, but the making has to have like a very utilitarian purpose to it, versus my youngest, my daughter, just makes because she makes. It's just like, it just kind of, life consumes her, and the way she resolves its sort of noise or its kind of disruptions is that she sits down and just draws or works with whatever is around her and just makes. And it's like, I think it's sort of mind and body connection that she's working through something, not necessarily about making something, but sort of resolving something that both mind and body need to be attuned to resolve.
So really, both of them have absorbed sort of the process of making and problem solving that comes with making too. That's great.
And I should say my husband is also an artist. So they come from an artistic household. So it seems, and not that we ever told them to make art. I think it was just watching both of us in our creative pursuits has done that.
Yeah. What medium does he work in?
Aaron is a trained painter, but has been writing a lot. And recently was on sabbatical for the idea of writing about perspective, sort of looking at canonical hierarchies in which we talk about perspective and really questioning those pedagogical understandings we have and thinking and renewed thinking about them.
So your children have this literary and visual creative context then.
Yeah.
I want to go back to something that you said about the early part of your career being trained in Western art, but then when you discovered, some examples of Indian art, you were really inspired. And so having to negotiate as an immigrant, those two sides. Do you see that in your parenting too? Maybe using your artistic practice as a way to keep the connection to your Indian cultural heritage, with your children and with your family?
Yeah, I think one of the things that I've realized by being here and the only one from my family means I have my aunt and uncle here, but I'm so far away from them that I'm sort of the only one here, that I'm following different norms and I'm creating my own norms as I follow them. And so in terms of sort of the Indianness of us, I spoke my language when my kids were little, but at some point they didn't want to be spoken to in Marathi. So, and they kind of asked me to not do that. And so I stopped. So it's, in some ways, that has always kind of like tinged me a little bit. But some of it came from sort of really listening to what it is they needed from me and wanted from me, but also kind of understanding what I want to give them if they're not willing to receive or want. Like I have to offer them in some other way.
Yeah, a negotiation.
It's a negotiation, yeah. And so the artistic practice, like the reason I started my artistic practice the way it is now is when my son Kavi was born, I wanted my parents to see him, but it was an impossible task. And so I figured the best way to connect these two generations together was that I would undig what I had in my suitcase that I brought with me, which were family photographs. And I would work with the family photographs as a way of showing it to him and them seeing him through that. That was like the simplest way of like starting that conversation. So I don't know if the Indian culture is necessarily in play, but the idea of family definitely is in play. But most of my making comes from really looking at sort of this Eastern culture, the understanding rituals in Eastern culture, and sort of manifesting them in ways that shift their religious context, but take on an artistic practice, but also engage with the contemporary sort of need and desire to use them, kind of. I don't know if that answers the question, but that's where I've landed.
Yes, absolutely. I think oftentimes mothers, especially immigrant mothers, can be keepers of culture, but then also it seems like through your practice, you're talking about also as an artist mother being a conduit of culture between Indian culture and family, and then American culture and family as well. I'd like to talk about the work that you're going to show in the Mother and exhibition. I'm really excited about it. The title of the series being The Idea of Home Follows Me. Can you describe the work and the genesis of it and how the idea or the concept came about?
Yeah. So my work has always been sort of kind of talking about the idea of belonging. The idea of belonging first using family photographs, the archive I had brought with me, then using objects of worship that belonged to my mother, and then now really thinking about land and how do I belong to a land that holds no ancestral footprints, but holds my future. Both my kids were born here. And really thinking about the question of who is an American, and especially in this kind of political climate, really kind of considering that question very intimately and from a migrant point of view to kind of really kind of to push back against this problematic rhetoric that's coming into play, right? And so the title, The Idea of Home Follows Me Everywhere I Go, comes from a conversation I heard with the artist Zarina Hamshi, and she goes by Zarina. And her work deals with she's an Indian American printmaker with this immigrant identity. And her work is about sort of borders, because she's part of that generation in which the India-Pakistan border is happening and they're shifting and they're moving. So the work is already dealing with boundaries and borders, and then coming to the United States and another boundary and border. And so I really like this idea of this, like the little phrase of the idea of home follows me everywhere I go, which has been always true. I'm always constructing what I think is a home. And I think what I've decided, and Eleanor, you and I were talking about it, is my home is my artistic practice, really, truly. That's what I've been cultivating for years and years. That's what I've been nurturing for years and years, is that idea of a home, that structure. And so in this work, what I've been doing is photographing the Midwestern landscape around me, not with the intention that I am a landscape photographer. My work has always been made in the studio. And so what I'm doing, and my work has always dealt with an archive. What I'm doing is archiving the landscape that's around me and thinking about the environment that's around me. But I'm really interested in land, how it's approached, not as a vista, but like land as ground that's underneath me. And so I bring these photographs that have become silver gelatin prints into my studio, and then I'm reworking them. And so one of the sets that will be in the exhibition is a set of 7 images that start off with me really looking at the sky and land relationship, and kind of coming and thinking about the narrative of the sky woman, falling from the sky, bringing these seeds with her, kind of becoming the first immigrant, and then creating a space for her children to thrive, right? And I really love this narrative. I love the folklore of it, but also the power of this woman, right? And my work has always kind of looked at women's labor, looked at how we make and create world and function, how we function in those spaces of creation, And so anyway, I'm making silver gelatin prints, and then what I'm doing is I wanted it to have the Western landscape in play, but I also wanted to merge the East in it. My work has always been sort of, there's 2 conversation or 2 narratives in it, the East and the West simultaneously. And so the silver gelatin prints have clay that's from the Midwest here, from my environment around me. And then I'm writing in Marathi, which is my mother tongue. And basically what I'm doing is talking about how do I rebury my ancestors here so that I can claim or belong to this land because they belong here. And so I'm writing like mama, baba, aji, azoba, which basically means mom, dad, grandmother, grandparents, great-grandmother, great-grandfather, ancestors, on the silver gelatin prints. Oh, and I'm also interested in sort of kind of moving certain traditional boundaries. The silver gelatin print is such a precious object that comes from the darkroom, and I really wanted to kind of shift its makeup, add to its makeup, and the clay is really interesting and important to me because it grounds me in the way that the silver gelatin prints talks about the vista, but the clay talks about the land that's underneath me.
Yeah, I love the complexity of this work during our studio visit, the multimedia aspect of it. So it has this, I think its root in the photography of the landscape, but then it actually, I think we were talking about it, it goes beyond the frame almost and becomes a sculptural piece as well. And then I also love the multilingual aspect of it too. So there's the visual language, but then also asking the question of who is this work for, we had talked about. So can you elaborate maybe just on the multimedia aspect of it and going beyond the frame, but then also the multilingual aspect of it and the complexity of that?
Yeah. So language has been something that's been really intriguing me, and it comes from this series that I started called Passport Cancelled, where I had to turn in my Indian passport to become an American passport. And they negated my Indian passport by a simple line that said, passport canceled as the holder has acquired foreign nationality. And I found that language so perplexing, so dry, so sterile. None of the emotions that I had gone through were in play. And I'd been thinking about language quite a bit, and thinking also that a lot of a lot of my academic language is the Western language, right? But when I'm talking with family, I'm always like in my Indian family, I talk in Marathi most predominantly, with a lot of English mixed in. But that's where my first line of conversation to my sister is like, how are you is always in Marathi, and then it proceeds. And so I've been thinking about like there's certain things, there's certain words, there's certain thoughts that are more present in a language than it's in the other. And when I started thinking about my ancestors, like I was like, I never call my parents mom or dad, like I'm not going to write mom or dad in there. It just made no sense because even I didn't know who they were at that point, they weren't my ancestors. And so it became very clear to me that the language had to come from my mother tongue. And also, I had been present in a conversation where an illustrator had sort of created this book that was written in South Indian language. And the first primary reader was a native South Indian person. And I was really fascinated by this decentraling of the Western. And I was like, why do I always have to have the Western gaze always be primary? Why can't it be secondary or not existent or however? And what does that mean to decentralize that Western gaze? And so the simplest thing was to just be honest and true with how I would evoke my ancestors. And the way I would evoke them is by calling them what I call them, which is Ai, Baba, Aji, Azuba, and that's how that comes into play. And I really am interested in like sort of this role of traditional and traditional silver gelatin prints, but then the non-traditional clay. And I kind of like the idea of this makeup, this duality that comes into play, these relationships that are not instinctive, but once they're created, they clearly work together and belong together. So I'm always interested in these narratives that are not visible, but can be made visible by just connecting them somehow.
Yeah, no, I love the duality of your work, and I think that just as an immigrant artist mother, the idea of just kind of fusing these dualities and making us think about what these dualities mean. So language, I like your use of the word mother tongue. I think because, we think about why is language related to the mother, why do we relate this to mother tongue? And so also relating to the concept of mother as keeper of culture. And then I really like how your work just kind of goes beyond the frame, with the use of the Adobe, activating the visual image. Yeah. What does that do for you, the use of the Adobe particularly?
Yeah, I think one of the things that, since my first work, Color Falls Down, I've been so always tactile. Like I really love touching, feeling, having like my hands in play. And with the digital space, that tactileness gets sort of rendered as flat, right? Like it's there, but when you put your hands on it, it's just like the smooth surface. So I think for me, just instinctually, I've been kind of going more and more into the analog world of photography where I'm like in the darkroom, my hands are in play. And then I still wanted something more tangible. And so that Adobe, that touch is in play. And I really wanted, for me, like anything, the artistic practice, the mothering practice, everything involves touch. Like touch is such a cornerstone to both of those things. And I really wanted to be able to feel it, to be able to write mother and to be able to feel that underneath my fingertips. That was sort of really essential to me. And I think that's what the key instinct was to make that happen.
Has motherhood ever been a challenge to your art practice, or maybe how the world's expectations for motherhood posed a challenge? You talked about going to these two residencies this summer at McDowell and Headlands, and how your children were able to come to Headlands, but that wasn't always the case, I think. So, yeah, so has motherhood ever presented some challenges then to the development of your art practice?
Yeah, I think in terms of just simply time, it's just, when you have really young kids, it's impossible to do both simultaneously, balance things, be academic. There's just not enough time. I always look at friends who haven't had children and are further ahead in their career, and I feel like I'm always going to be playing the role of catch up in some ways, because so many years were dedicated to parenting. But then, like, simple things that I can actually see is like, I had a residency, and I assumed that I would be able to bring my children to the residency, to my child to my residency, because I just had one. And they were like, no, you can't. And so at the end of the residency, every day, it was Skype, I think, I would Skype in with Covey and we would play Candyland on there. And it was just like, it was like 4 weeks of Candyland. It means that I think I've never played that much Candyland in my whole life either. But, Skype. And after some point, even he was not interested in that. So he would just go in and out of the frame whenever he wanted. But I just sat there waiting for him to come in and out of frame. And I also remember there was another mother there simultaneously. And she and I recently had a residency together. And she told me, she felt like she was being a bad mother watching me parent because I was trying to be so present for my child. And actually, I was watching her going, oh, the way you actually do this is you actually have to cut complete ties when you leave, because this is not possible to do both of them simultaneously. So we both were sort of learning from each other what to do and what we shouldn't be doing, And we never had that conversation there, but we had that conversation like 10 years later when we were in this residency again. And she was like, yeah, you made me feel like a bad parent. And I was like, I'm sorry, I was trying so desperately to be a good parent that I think I was doing a bad parenting job, and not being true to myself, which was that I was there to be an artist. I decided to be an artist, and that's what my task should have been, because my husband was with my child. I didn't need to be the parent, didn't need to be the visible parent. That was my own sort of desire for mothering, right? Like that I am important, I am necessary, And so some of that has been sort of kind of realizing as they age that I'm not that necessary in their life constantly. And also understanding that creates a space for me, actually, that is fantastic, that I can go and pursue other things because I'm not that physically necessary. And so for the last 4 or 5 years, I've started redoing residencies, which I didn't do at all after the first one, because I was like, I have to be physically present. And now I am realizing, first of all, I've grounded myself as a parent. They know I'm their mother. If they need me, they know how to get in touch with me. My kids are older, the needs are different. I can go do things that I want to do, and I can be selfish about it. And in some ways, that kind of helps us a little bit, because sometimes if there's a tension between a child and me, by going away, it just takes that away, And I also think about that stress a little bit differently, because I'm in different space. I'm enjoying myself. I'm making work. I'm feeling good about myself. And that feeling good translates back into our relationship. So I think in that sense, I think I probably should have done residencies when they were younger. I have a very, very supportive husband and a very supportive partner in terms of motherhood. I would actually call him the mother of our sort of relationship, because he manages all the parental tasks, right? Like every mother's like I have to do play dates for my child, and like my husband does that. Like I'm not the one who's doing those kinds of tasks. But I think the role of the mother felt so sort of like I had to be present to be a mother. And I think that's the problem, that we sort of take on that this task that is way beyond our ability to upkeep and hold. We're willing to take it on just because we think that's what motherhood is about. But I think motherhood is about so many other things, including just the mother. Just
Yeah, I think that's actually great role model, being a great role model. I think a lot of mothers feel guilt,
oh
as you
yeah.
said, and the time management and having to spend every minute with their children. But I mean, what you're describing is more making the most of your time with them, but not having to be present all the time.
Yeah.
And then also how it's healthy when your children see that their mother is doing something that they're invested in and they enjoy. And then also renegotiating traditional roles within the family structure to allow somebody else to collaborate, and how that may actually be healthier for the entire family. Did you have role models, like mother artist role models, when, you were navigating your career, or do you feel like this is something that you really had to figure out on your own?
Yeah, I think my mom was a stay-at-home mom, a housewife, so I assume that's how parenting was done. But she didn't have a career, so at some point that kind of falls apart, right? Like trying to be a housewife, a parent, academic, or artist is just too much. I have lots of friends who are not parents. Interestingly enough, I think the generation after me has shifted, but my generation in the academia, especially, most of them don't have children. So it was a little bit harder to see, but I had a few mothers who were very fascinating, very interesting, and I think seeing them navigate their careers is really truly made me understand that parenting doesn't necessarily mean you constantly put your child first. Parenting means you have to kind of understand what your needs are, what the family needs are, and kind of navigating and trying to create some sort of balance through that. And also having a really good partner in those endeavors really just makes a huge difference, right? So yeah, I didn't have that many role models, but those who were present were very good at sort of fundamentally understanding that motherhood is not, monolithic. It can come in multiple ways. I remember talking to a friend who had older kids and telling her I couldn't wait for my kids to be older when, my kids were like 4 and 5 and something like that, because I was going to have so much time. And she just looked at me and she was just like, oh, yeah, no, you won't. And I was like, what? And she's like, yeah, the, the things get different. Right now, they're physically needing you. And then later on, they're going to need you emotionally and mentally. And that's a different kind of exhaustion. At that point, I didn't understand what she meant because I just hadn't gone through it. So sometimes you can see things and you can hear things, but unless you physically go through it, it doesn't quite comprehend. And now I know what she means. It's like, yes, my kids don't physically need me, but that emotional challenge or mental challenge of like, how do I navigate them or how do I mentor them through life is like a different way to it.
Right. I'm so glad you said that about how motherhood is not a monolith and there's no one way to do it. And I think that that's actually in the project description of the Mother and project. And I appreciate the anecdote that you shared about the other artist's mother at the residency. And I think sometimes we set such expectations based on our peers, but we really need to, as a community, we need to support each other and not judge, but say, hey, you're figuring it out and you're doing it this way, and I'm going to figure it out and do it this way. But both ways are okay, are specific for our families. So you mentioned also in the part of the juggling act being an academic. So do you feel that being a mother and motherhood has impacted your teaching practice and the way you interact with your students?
Yeah, I'm definitely more patient with them. I think I definitely sort of understand. There's a lot of sort of mental health challenges this generation is facing. There's a lot of anxiety. It's a different kind of generation. And I think parenting and having a child sort of have those anxieties kind of makes me understand them a little bit better. But I also am like desperately trying to separate the parenting and the academic, being an academic. Like I'm already parenting two children, and I'm like floundering through that role. I don't necessarily want to be of a parental in a parental space with these students because they're my students. They're not, and they have their own sort of family dynamics that they come from. But I think the patience and sort of understanding how to deal with a different generation that comes from like watching my own child, and sort of understanding that once he ages out of that, I don't know, will I keep understanding? I always keep telling myself I'm aging out of this 18 to 22-year-old age group. I feel like I'm constantly aging out of that. I felt that right at 20 something when I was teaching, at 30 something I was teaching, 40 something I was teaching, and now I'm about to enter my 50s. So, but I think what I've learned is that I sort of give them the freedom to work with me. Like they have to work, but I give them the freedom of sort of kind of in conversations with me that we navigate timelines, that we navigate how we work, how we communicate together. The workload doesn't shift, but how we respond to each other shifts, and how we critique and think and talk about each other's work shifts. So yeah, this has been a really actually, this is something that I'm like struggling with right now, because critiques have been really interesting, because I think this culture thinks of critiques as it's problematic, like listening to something that is not necessarily always nice to hear, that your work is not working. And so how do you kind of have those conversations? How do we allow it so that it's not me saying these things to them, but we're in conversation? We talk about what how work can respond to certain things, how it can benefit. I think I just have to change the model in which I talk to them and how I talk to them. And that's what I'm sort of looking and thinking about and researching about in my own academic space, is how does these narratives happen in the classroom so that it's not, the role is not hierarchical, but something that we're being very sort of humane to each other, and we're being respectful to each other. And I'm trying to figure out what those things look like for this generation.
Yeah, I think that first of all, what you're saying about setting boundaries, as an educator, that you are a mother, but you're not their mother. So you don't need to take on that emotional labor with your students. So I think that's an important boundary. But I also think that what you're talking about, having this non-hierarchical relationship, and one takeaway from being a mother, having that, retaining that piece of empathy and collaboration in terms of problem solving and in critique. So I think as a parent too, you can't always solve your children's problems, and you don't always want to approach your children in a situation where you're critiquing them if you don't think they're on a path that's constructive for them. But I think what you're saying is, how do you guide your students alongside them to a path where you can make constructive criticism and they can find their path towards success and towards their own goals. And I think that that is parenting too, is just how do you join your children in that journey to also help them problem solve and collaborate with them in a non-hierarchical way. So I'm thrilled to have you participating in the Mother and exhibition. You and I met maybe a couple of years ago when you were in the Found in Translation exhibition of Asian American artists at the Nelson. And I loved your work then, Buttons for Eyes, and then also the collaboration that you were able to achieve with other Asian American artists. So that always impressed me that you're a collaborator and you understand the importance of community. What does it mean for you to be part of the Mother and exhibition, and why did you accept the invitation to participate?
I think the role of an artist and a mother is such an interesting combination. I think for one of my sabbatical, I had a friend recommend one of her students. She came and she was fantastic, and she has a tenured position, which she went on to do. And at some point, she wrote to me and said, I'm going to have a child, and thank you for showing me like what a parent and an artist role looks like, a model looks like. And I was like, I didn't show you anything. I was barely present. I was on sabbatical. I was gone, And she was just like, it was just good to see that was present, like just by sheer presence of me, who was a mother, but who's also a very engaged artist, was enough for her to go, oh, this is possible, And so just the simple presence of that, this exhibition, I think is necessary. Just that simple title is necessary to make space and for people to understand we're navigating things while doing multiple things. But both of them are really hard, challenging undertakings, and we take them on under our own doing. Like I took on being the role of an artist, and I took on the role of being mother, right? But that doesn't necessarily mean that, I don't know, it's not heroic in any way. It's humbling in so many ways, But these are necessary spaces for us to be seen in and to understand we're present, we're making work, we're also parenting, and our identities are interlinked. I don't know. It's so essential to my makeup that I can't think of like not being present for it,
Yeah, I love the concept of presence. I think mother is one of the roles where just your presence can be comforting. And then I love how you've extended the idea of being an artist mother in the show as a role model to others, that to show that it can be done and there's no one way to do it. There's this multiplicity of different identities and pathways to being an artist mother. So yeah, I'm so honored to have you in the show, and to have your work and just the example that you showed other emerging artist mothers and artists who want to have families, and how that is possible. So thank you, Priya.
Thank you.
This podcast was produced by Clio Scroll Productions, with Kara Heitz as the director and Emily Milner as the audio engineer. Music is by Brooke Tooley and the Moon Travelers. The Mother and project team includes Eleanor Lim Midyet, project manager and co-curator, Courtney Wasson, co-curator, Laura Berman, senior consultant, Stephanie Leedy-Voulkos Art Center owner and mother of the Crossroads, Erin Woodworth, Leedy-Voulkos gallery manager, and Debbie Barrett-Jones, Leedy-Voulkos gallery assistant. An extra thank you to the Kansas City Artists Coalition, Distribution by Air Company, and Hotel Indigo for their support. Don't forget to listen to the other episodes of the Mother and podcast, and also remember to check out the Mother and exhibition, which runs from September 5th to November 21st, 2025 at the Leedy-Voulkos Art Center in Kansas City, Missouri. More information can be found on their website at www.leedy-voulkos.org. www.leedy-volkos.com. That's www.leedy-volkos.com. Thanks for listening.